So you were out like on the ground in 2016, and we've talked about this because so much of what's going on is a press failure story. And there is the big picture, like there is the Noam Chomsky manufacturing consent. There are limited lines of ideological debate allowed, and you've covered that from the very beginning of your career, particularly on foreign policy, military industrial complex. But what you're seeing now, specifically around Bernie, is just a complete like meltdown because the artifice is breaking. And you already saw that in 2016.
Yeah, I mean, 2016 was a really incredible experience for me because I was on the road all year long. Every week I was in a new state, and it's intense and it's tiring, but also so eye-opening. I got to see a lot of the country that I had never seen before, and that's how you really get, a pulse for the mood of the nation and what voters are thinking and feeling and what their priorities are. And one thing that I really noticed that was a significant difference between the way we did our coverage at HuffPost and the way everyone else did their coverage was that, we'd go into a state, we'd go to a couple rallies or events that were put on by campaigns, but then we also went out and did other stories that actually, reflected what was happening in those specific communities that we were in. And so I just noticed that, when you have a lot of reporters that are just embedded with the campaign, they're on the bus all the time, they only go to these rallies, and then at the rallies, they're in like the press pen or they're up on these bleachers. You're not even mingling with anybody. If you do talk to any real people, they're already the uber politically, excited type of people because they're at a political rally. And so, of course, you're out of touch. And that's something that I don't know if you ever listened to the Daily, the New York Times podcast. But
I do not, Alyona.
Not shocking, not shocking. But Michael Barbaro recently had Dean Baquet on to do like a post-mortem of 2016 and kind of where the New York Times is now compared to 2016 and their election coverage.
Even more embarrassing. My editorial, not Alyona.
I'll give him a little credit for at least broaching the topic and at least having Dean Baquet on.
I'm not trying, if it was actually so, do you know what I'm saying? I feel like there's a lot of hey, let's analyze ourselves. Oh, you know what? We couldn't really done any different.
I was getting to the part of where they didn't analyze themselves. Give me a minute.
All right, sorry. I know you love the New
rambling.
York Times. Go ahead.
Okay, so there was almost no acknowledgement by Dean Baquet that they, went too hard for Hillary, hired a reporter about the Clintons before Hillary Clinton even said that she was going to be a candidate. And started writing a lot of lines about her being the nominee long before she was the actual nominee. And his excuse was kind of like, yeah, if I could go back, there's a lot of edits I'd make. And it's like, it doesn't really work that way. But then he made the point that they weren't out in the country enough, and that's why they misread Donald Trump's victory so much. And everyone all right?
Is everybody okay?
I thought you were falling over because I was so funny.
Everybody all right? Okay.
And yeah, no shit. You didn't go out in the country enough. And so that's, the real problem with what we're seeing with Bernie right now, too, is that it's like not a dirty secret. But it is a dirty secret that there is no such thing as a liberal media, right?
Yeah.
And
right.
The media, as we know it, the mainstream, the establishment media is centrist, is moderate, and that's just kind of the norm. That's the status quo. And there are massive assumptions that are made based on everyone just being in the center.
Mm-hmm. And even how wrong that perception of the center is. You could find many people in the country who are going to be more on the right on social issues and hate banks. I will say, and I'm getting some flack for this, and whatever. I don't even need to do the qualifier. James Carville is James Carville, but he's the only person that they allow on television who's fear-mongering about Bernie, about things that might actually be a problem for him, and still saying he said today, Bernie's talking about felons voting. That's going to be a fucking disaster. And then in the next graph, he actually is like, why has nobody put out an ad of Donald Trump in Davos saying you need to cut Medicare? What the fuck is going on? Which is 100% right. And he's the only person that they allow on television, I think, that has, or not the only, but one of the only that is like slightly in line with that. Everybody else is just like, I got to tell you, people in the middle of the country are just so thirsty to give rich people tax cuts and cut their Social Security. And I don't think Bernie gets that.
But again, there's all these assumptions that are made, like, well, we need a moderate candidate if they're really going to win. Says who? It's like, says what historical data? When's the last time we had a real left candidate who was the Democratic nominee who lost an election? We haven't, because we haven't had a real left candidate. So, or who was the nominee? So, it's things like that. Or you watch any of the debates. I don't know what's happening at the debate tonight, but
What time? I don't know what time the debate tonight is.
It starts. It's on
Oh,
now.
it's on now. You people are champs.
Yeah, you're at the right
What do you want to
place.
watch that shit for anyways? Bernie won it.
Yeah, Bernie won.
Let me guess. Amy Klobuchar was like, people are forgetting that I win statewide. And actually, when I put my staffer's face in a toilet, that shows toughness. And
I love her
Warren's
little
like,
one-liners, though.
what'd you say?
Her little
Her
one-liners.
one-liners.
Rehearses like 20 times and looks in the mirror.
I'd like to see how his hair looks in a blizzard.
And then Warren's like, here's the thing. Here's why I'm here. Here's why I'm fucking everything up. Here's the thing. I have a narcissistic desire to be president. Here's the thing. And then Pete will be like, I don't know where you come from, but where I come from, CIA training school, we regularly disregard the popular vote all the time.
You guys watched the debate. That's it.
Got it.
And it didn't have to go there. But just think about it. At the debates, you will have the moderators be asking really serious questions over and over and over again. If we're talking about healthcare, Medicare for all, for example, about how are you going to pay for this? And that'll come after a 30-minute segment on foreign policy, where we're like, well, will you meet with this world leader? And how are you going to confront Iran? Yada, yada, yada. And then no one ever asks, how are you going to keep paying for the largest military budget in the world? And so that's what I mean by, like, the liberal media by no means is liberal if that's the mindset and that's the approach that they always take.
And you've been working in media to try to push on that for a very long time. And I guess, outside of all the institutional reasons we know why that's the case, what is up with, the culture of people who go into media that affects that?
What's wrong with us? And I never really have worked in, I guess HuffPost is kind of a mainstream organization, but, I've been kept out of all the networks because my dirty past working for RT. I think that there's a lot of groupthink that goes on, and people don't want to acknowledge it. They don't see it maybe because you just become part of this machine, especially when there's a news cycle that's moving really quickly all the time, and you think like, well, they're covering it, so we got to cover the same thing, and so no one ever steps outside of it. You just kind of start rolling with the flow, and so then you don't want to be the person that's getting ridiculed, for daring to take a different approach or having a different point of view on a story. So I don't know. I guess it's just not a lot of critical, unique thinkers are the ones who.
They're all a bunch of nerds.
No, there are great reporters out there, but it also might not be what they're being assigned or what their editors are telling them is going to be able to make the cut to be a story or.
Well, that's another thing too. That especially after 2016, there was this big phenomenon of parachute reporters, where you send somebody who's been in New York City or DC their whole life and you send them to Alabama. And as a Southerner, I always crack up when I read these in-depth reports on the South because they always start the same way. They either start out in a Piggly Wiggly or with some line like, the air was as thick as Meemaw's chicken and dumplings, right? But it's really bad because the way that they portray these regions of the country really matters. And the way that the New York Times and a lot of these national publications report on the South, people don't realize that that's the most diverse part of the country, that has one of the largest LGBTQ parts of the country. And these people are completely glossed over because of their fixation of finding this mythical, hillbilly Trump voter to interview. And it's a big problem.
No, the obsession with understanding the Trump voter after 2016, when everyone was trying to do a postmortem.
Haven't we learned so much from all those experiments?
You know what else I also find
Trump
funny?
voter profiles.
just even geographically, like you could just go to like upstate New York. Like,
For real.
you know what I'm
Same.
saying? Like,
I'm from North Dakota. It's the exact same thing up there.
this doesn't require, like, you literally could just go a couple hours out of New York City, and you go to parts of Long Island and see it.
But I do want to say, part of that is also because we don't
Keep
have
Long Island's name out of your mouth. Alyona, go ahead. It's a great fucking community.
a large part of the problem. A large part of the problem is that you don't have local news is dying, and it has been dying a very gradual, or maybe not so gradual, but it's definitely been in this pattern for a long time, and that's part of the reason that we don't really have a good pulse on what's going on in communities everywhere, and it really, it's a problem. It's something that I think we feel very intimately when you look at the way that campaigns are covered and the way that the events are set up. Like I was not representative of the country, but every single media organization spends a ton of money to have everybody flock there from from their companies to make sure that they're there to cover that event instead of going elsewhere.
You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.